We all think we know the story of the Garden of Eden, right? Adam, Eve, a serpent, and an apple. But if you look just a little bit closer, there's a real mystery at its heart, a kind of theological detective story that's all about two very, very powerful trees.
And that gets us to the big question we're tackling today. Were these trees literally dispensing magical powers, eat this, live forever? Or were they something much more profound, symbols of a huge cosmic choice that was going to shape the destiny of all humanity? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to try and solve together.
All right, so first, let's set the scene. We're in the book of Genesis. We're introduced to this perfect garden, a total paradise. But right there, smack in the middle of it all, two specific trees get called out, and they set the stage for everything that comes next.
Okay, so here's our first set of clues. The text says, God fills the garden with all these beautiful trees that are great for food. But then it specifically names two, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And with those two trees comes one single, crucial command. Whatever you do, do not eat from that second tree. So let's start our investigation with that first piece of evidence, the tree of life. I mean, the name alone sounds incredible. Eat from it and you live forever. But was it really that simple? Was it just some kind of magical fruit? Well, some thinkers argue there's a much, much deeper meaning going on here. So how exactly did this tree work? The whole debate really boils down to two main ideas. On one hand, you have the intrinsic power view, which says, yeah, the fruit itself was magical, it had some kind of life-giving juice in it. But then there's the symbolic power view, which a theologian named John Calvin famously argued. He suggested the tree wasn't magical at all. Nope, it was something else entirely, a powerful symbol. And to really get what Calvin is saying, we have to understand this one word, sacrament. Basically, a sacrament is an outward physical sign of an inward spiritual reality. Just think of it like a bridge between what you can see and what you can't, a visible symbol of God's grace. And here's the core of the argument, straight from Calvin himself. He's saying God didn't put some special power into the tree. Instead, that tree was meant to be a constant, physical reminder, a symbol that humanity's life came directly from God. So eating the fruit was an act of saying, yep, I get it, I depend on you.
Okay, if that still sounds a bit abstract, here's a great way to think about it. The story of Samson. Remember him? His incredible strength was tied to his long hair. But the hair itself wasn't the magic part. It was just the outward symbol of his promise to God. The moment that symbol was cut, the reality it represented, his strength, was gone. In this view, the tree of life worked in the exact same way. All right, let's move on to our second piece of evidence. And this is the more famous one, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this is where our detective story gets really complicated, because there's a huge puzzle buried right in the middle of it all.
It all kicks off with the serpent's promise. This is the big temptation. The serpent doesn't just say, hey, this fruit tastes good. No, he claims it will actually make humanity like God by giving them this special kind of knowledge. Talk about an enticing offer.
Now, here's the question for you. When you hear that, your first thought is probably, well, the serpent's the villain, so he must be lying, right? But what if he wasn't? And bam, here's the twist that just messes with everything. After Adam and Eve eat the fruit, God himself says the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. He actually seems to confirm that the serpent was telling the truth. This is the central mystery we have to solve. What did the serpent really mean, and why on earth did God seem to agree with him? Okay, so how do we make sense of this? Theologians have come up with several different ways to solve this puzzle. Let's line up the three main theories, our main suspects, and see how they try to crack the case. All right, let's check out the lineup. First, there's the mythical view, which kind of sees this as a story about jealous gods who are worried about humans getting too powerful. Then, you've got the view from a theologian named Gerhardus Voss. He argues that God's statement was ironic, sarcastic. Like, oh, look at you now, so godlike? But it's this third view from scholars like Vannoy and Bavinck that's really compelling. They argue that man was trying to usurp God's role, and God's statement wasn't ironic at all. It was terribly, terribly serious. This final theory really seems to unlock the whole story. It argues that the temptation wasn't about gaining information at all. It was about seizing a position. It was about choosing to be a god yourself. So the key that unlocks this entire puzzle is the word know. In this context, it doesn't just mean learning more facts. It means seizing the power and the authority to decide for yourself what counts as good and what counts as evil. It's about becoming your own moral lawgiver.
Let that just sink in for a second. The sin wasn't about learning some secret piece of information. It was an act of rebellion. It was humanity essentially saying, you know what, God, I no longer accept your definition of good and evil. From now on, I'm the one who decides. I'll create my own moral reality.
And this quote from the theologian Herman Bavinck just nails it. He says, the choice was to break free from God's authority, to try and stand on your own 2 feet, and to figure out your own path to happiness totally on your own, to become your own God. And here is why all of this matters so much. This isn't just some ancient story. It is the fundamental human dilemma. It's that deep-down desire to be the ultimate authority in our own lives, to be our own source of right and wrong, and to make ourselves the absolute center of our own universe. It's really an ancient story about the very modern desire for total autonomy.
So in the end, those 2 trees were never really about magical fruit. They were symbols of a choice between living in a dependent relationship with God or seizing independence to become your own God. And that ancient story leaves us with a question that echoes all the way to today. Who ultimately gets to define what is good and what is evil?